My mom asked me to read a letter at her funeral. I thought it was a goodbye to her family, until she mentioned a man named David no one knew, and revealed that he was my real father. My uncle looked away, and that's when I understood everything. Growing up, I always thought my family was ordinary. Loud dinners, awkward holidays, stories repeated 100 times over. My dad, or the man I thought was my dad, was strict, a bit distant, but he provided. My Uncle Tom, Mom's brother, was the opposite. Warm, funny, always sneaking me candy when no one was looking. When Mom got sick, it happened fast. Pancreatic cancer. By the time the doctors found it, the conversations were already about comfort, not treatment. We spent a lot of time at her bedside, saying things you only say when you know you're about to lose someone. A week before she passed, she handed me a sealed envelope. "Don't read this until after," she said, her hand trembling. "Read it out loud. At the funeral." I said yes, of course. Because what else do you say to your dying mother? I didn't look at it until the day of the service. After the prayers were done and the last person had stood up to speak, I stepped forward, pulled the letter from my pocket. The paper felt heavier than it should have. The room quieted, eyes turned toward me. Her handwriting filled the page. It started like you'd expect. Love, gratitude, a few memories she hoped we'd all hold on to. Then, halfway through, the tone changed. "To my son," she wrote. "There's something I should have told you a long time ago." She wrote that the man who raised me, the one whose name is on my birth certificate, whose last name I carry, wasn't my biological father. She'd met someone years before she married him. His name was David. They'd fallen in love during a summer when she was barely 20, and he left for a job overseas before she found out she was pregnant. "I wanted to tell you when you turned 18, she wrote. "But your father had just lost his job. We were barely holding things together, and I was scared of what it might do to us." She said David never knew about me, that she tried to write him a letter once, but never sent it, that she thought maybe it didn't matter because the man who raised me was my father, in name, in duty, in effort, even if not by blood. But then she added one more sentence. "If you want to know more about him, ask Tom." I paused. "Read that last part again." And that's when I noticed Tom, sitting in the third row, staring at the floor, not moving. Everyone else looked confused, shifting in their seats, unsure if this was real or some weird metaphor. But Tom? He looked like he'd been punched in the chest. After the service, while people were hugging, crying, shuffling out in black coats and awkward small talk, I walked straight to him. "Who is David?" I asked. His voice barely came out. "Let's talk somewhere private." We sat in his car, parked beneath an old maple tree outside the church. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the cooling engine and the muffled hum of people still gathering near the entrance. I watched Tom's hands tremble slightly as he gripped the steering wheel, like he was holding onto the past by his fingertips. "David was real," he said finally. "Your mom didn't make that part up." I nodded. "And you knew about him?" "I didn't at first," he said. "But a few years after she married your dad, she came to me in tears, told me everything. About the summer, the pregnancy, the decision. She asked if she'd done the right thing." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that secrets eat people alive. And she said she'd already been eaten." His voice cracked when he said that. I looked at him carefully. "Why would she tell you to explain it to me?" He closed his eyes, swallowed hard. "Because I'm the one who tracked David down." I stared. "You found him?" Tom nodded slowly. "After your mom got sick, she couldn't stop talking about him, wondering what would have happened. If you'd looked like him, if he would have been proud. She asked me just once to find out where he was. For closure. Nothing more. And I asked. He hesitated. He died 2 years ago. Cancer. Something in me dropped. The chance to ever meet him, to ask him questions, to just see him. Gone before I even knew it existed. But then Tom said something else. He left behind a letter. For you. Your mom asked me to deliver it. If you ever wanted it. Tom reached into the glove box and pulled out a slim envelope, already yellowing at the edges. My name was written on the front. Not in my mom's handwriting, not in Tom's. It was unfamiliar, careful, almost hesitant. Like whoever wrote it wasn't sure they had the right to. I held it for a moment without opening it. "How long have you had this?" I asked. Your mom gave it to me right before the hospital took her full time, he said. She said if you ever asked, you deserved the truth. From him, not just her. I nodded, heart pounding. I opened it. The letter was short, barely a page, but every sentence hit like a punch. I never got to meet you, it began. But your mother told me about you. She sent photos once, years ago, through a friend. I didn't know what to do with them. I wasn't brave. I wasn't ready to be a father. And when I finally was, it felt too late. He wrote about his regrets. Not just about my mom, but about never finding his place in the world. He talked about music he loved, cities he lived in, mistakes he made. And then came the part that broke me. If you're anything like her, you're strong. If you're anything like me, you're probably wondering if it all means anything. Maybe it doesn't. But you do. You always did. I read it 3 times. Didn't say anything. Just stared through the windshield at the cemetery across the road, where both of my parents now rested. One who raised me with distance, the other who never got the chance. I folded the letter carefully. And for the first time that entire week, I cried. Not for what I'd lost, but for what I'd never had the chance to know. The days after the funeral were quiet. Not in the way houses get when someone passes. Not heavy with casseroles and condolences, but quiet in me. Like something had finally gone still after years of humming just beneath the surface. I kept David's letter in my desk drawer. Read it once in the morning, once at night. Not because I needed the words over and over, but because reading them made him feel real. Made me feel like maybe I wasn't just the product of a lie, but the echo of 2 truths that never had a chance to meet. I didn't tell many people. Not yet. I wasn't ready to explain that the man who raised me wasn't the one who made me. Or that the man who made me never got to try. Some things are too fragile to hand off to someone else's opinion. But I did write something. A letter of my own. I wrote to David. I told him I was angry at first. Confused. That I hated not having a face to attach to the thoughts that now filled my head. I told him that sometimes I looked in the mirror and wondered what parts of me came from him. The shape of my hands, the way I think before I speak, the loneliness I could never quite name. And then I told him about my life. About the music I liked. The mistakes I'd made. The fact that I still wasn't sure what forgiveness looked like. But I was starting to believe that maybe it looked like this. Like understanding a man you never met. And choosing not to hate him for being absent. But to carry the better parts of him forward anyway. I kept writing. The letter turned into a habit. Not daily, but often. Sometimes just a few lines. Other times, whole pages. I started telling him things I hadn't told anyone. About the fear that maybe I wasn't enough like him to matter. Or maybe too much like him to fit anywhere else. I told him about my childhood. About the first time I rode a bike. About how I used to think Dad's silence was a kind of punishment. I told him about Uncle Tom. How he tried to hold things together. How I couldn't decide if I resented him for hiding the truth or loved him for carrying it alone. One night, I got curious. I Googled David's name. Not much came up, no obituaries, no social media, no family ties. Just a few mentions in old newsletters from a small-town radio station. Apparently, he'd hosted a late-night jazz show for a few years. I found a clip. His voice came through the speakers like it had just been waiting. Low, warm, easy. He introduced a track by Thelonious Monk. Said something about how jazz was the only music that sounds like breathing feels. Then he laughed. Softly. Like he was smiling. And I realized I knew that laugh. Because it was mine. Because I'd heard it come out of my own mouth when something caught me off guard. Or when I was trying to defuse tension with a joke. It was a laugh I thought I'd invented. Turns out, I'd inherited it. I sat there in the dark, listening to a man I never met, and felt more seen than I had in years. And that's when something shifted. I didn't need to carry grief anymore. I could carry connection instead. In the months that followed, I started living a little differently. Not drastically. I didn't quit my job or move across the world. But small things. Intentional things. I signed up for a jazz class at the community center. Not because I wanted to be a musician, but because I wanted to understand the rhythm that shaped part of my DNA. I visited my mom's grave once a week. Not to ask questions she couldn't answer, but to say thank you. For raising me. For trying. For telling the truth even if it came too late. And I called Uncle Tom more. We didn't talk about David again, not directly. But sometimes he'd say things like, Your mom would be proud. Or you remind me of her when you pause like that. And I let those moments mean what they needed to. As for the man who raised me, my legal father, I still visit his grave too. I don't hold resentment anymore, just complexity. He may not have loved easily, but he stayed. And sometimes that matters more than we think. I'm not defined by the secret anymore. I'm not haunted by the silence. I'm a son of more than one story. And for the first time in my life, that's enough.